Welcome to Yellowstone, land of geysers, hot springs, dazzling colors, wolves, bears, and bison. You probably came to Yellowstone to enjoy these places and animals. What you may not know, however, is that there are actually millions of organisms that are helping put on this show. They are called thermophiles. Yes, that is them. They are everywhere in the park. What exactly is a thermophile?
A thermophile is a heat-loving organism, and typically we're talking about quite high temperatures, more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
And we're not talking about an organism that can simply tolerate high temperature. That wouldn't be considered a thermophile. We're talking about an organism that has its optimum growth temperature at a high temperature.
To give you a point of reference, we could be considered mesophiles. We have an optimum temperature from 20 to 35 degrees Celsius, and we can even tolerate up to 40 degrees. Thermophiles prefer it a bit hotter, from 40 to 80 degrees, and Yellowstone is even home to hyperthermophiles that live in temperatures above 80 degrees. The thermophiles of Yellowstone come from all three domains of life: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Archaea are single-celled organisms, and they can often be found in the hottest areas of thermal features, with temperatures in the neighborhood of 100 degrees Celsius. Bacteria, which are also single-celled organisms, prefer environments with slightly lower temperatures, around 85 degrees. Eukarya, which can be multicellular, include algae, fungi, plants, animals, and even us. Thermophilic eukaryotes live in even cooler areas and aren't found at temperatures much past 60 degrees. One thing you might be wondering is why thermophiles can survive such high temperatures when we can't.
Thermophiles, their cells are really amazing. They can survive at high temperatures because their genes and their proteins are different than ours. Human cells, our proteins would denature at high temperatures.
Which means that as temperature rises, our proteins fall apart. On the other hand, the proteins inside the cells of thermophiles stay rock solid and are unaffected by the heat. Yellowstone is home to countless species of thermophiles, but they don't all live in the same areas of the park. As it turns out, water temperature and chemistry are the two most important factors in determining where thermophiles live.
Probably the most important is temperature. Some organisms prefer 80 to 90, some prefer 70 to 80. So we can find a distribution of different thermophiles just based on temperature. Of course, chemistry plays a secondary but extremely important role in the distribution of different thermophiles. For example, if you have a high iron system, we might have organisms that are oxidizing iron. If we have high sulfide, we might be oxidizing sulfur for the energy. And therefore the chemistry combined with the temperature all of a sudden starts to control the distribution of what organisms are present.
Besides temperature, the water's pH is another important parameter that affects where different species of thermophiles occur. So what exactly is pH?
pH is a measure of the acidity of water. So perfect distilled water is neutral. It's a 7 on the pH scale, whereas moving to higher levels of pH, you get more basic. Things like drain cleaner are about a 14 on the pH scale, so very basic, whereas things like battery acid are very, very acidic, would be about a 1 on the pH scale. We have features in Yellowstone that are 1 or below, very, very acidic features. We also have some that are quite basic, and we have thermophiles that live in all of these environments. As you travel around Yellowstone, you will encounter several different thermal areas, and they're all unique. Places like Mammoth Hot Springs, where we are now, have a very unique bedrock, a limestone underneath us. So the mineral that comes up to the surface is called calcium carbonate, and it forms a rock called travertine. The water itself here is neutral water that is not boiling, it's not too hot. Whereas other areas like Norris Geyser Basin, we would call acid sulfate areas, where the water itself is very hot, but also the water and the gas coming from underground carry hydrogen sulfide, and this ultimately becomes sulfuric acid. So the springs may be very acidic, and you have different microbes that will thrive there. And then you have other areas like the Upper Geyser Basin, for example, we would call neutral chloride, where the water, it's more neutral, maybe even a little bit basic. It can be quite hot though, so different microbes will thrive in those environments.
As you're out exploring all these different environments, you'll see many different species of thermophiles. But how can you tell them apart? Along with water temperature and chemistry, it just so happens that all those beautiful colors you see are important clues.
Color of thermal systems in Yellowstone is a wonderful diagnostic tool. If you look at Grand Prismatic and start from the middle of the pool, you can tell there's no organisms there because it's only the blue color of the water. And a lot of that blue color in the water comes from dissolved silica. And dissolved silica is very high in hot water systems. Then as you work cooler, you get to a band of yellow color that by definition we know that it's probably no hotter than 75 centigrade right at that point, because that's where photosynthesis can start. And the organisms then that live in the yellow band are a little different than the organisms that live in the orange band, and they're expressing different pigments to capture light energy. And so you can have a lot of different species of thermophiles living right next to each other in these beautiful banded patterns based on their optimum temperature range.
In fact, one runoff channel, such as this one at Mammoth's Mound Spring, can have hundreds of different species of thermophiles.
What's incredible is you can't see each living cell, but when they live all together like that, they create these beautiful and very unique mats all around the thermal features. Thermophiles are the smallest building block of this ecosystem. Starting with the archaea and bacteria, you'll then have bigger and bigger organisms that will start to eat those cells. So you'll have some eukaryotes, which are protozoa, which will sort of swim around eating archaea, eating bacteria. And from there you'll have some ephedrid flies. You might have spiders be a predator of the insects. And then even birds will come in, like killdeer will start to come in to eat the insects.
While thermophiles are stunning, unique, and fascinating to see in Yellowstone's thermal areas, they are also a subject of intense scientific research, and they hold a lot of potential.
Life may have evolved in high temperatures. If life started at high temperature, then we have a beautiful place to study the possibility of those processes. Yellowstone itself is interesting because it has more geothermal systems than the rest of the globe combined. So Yellowstone is an exciting area to study high temperature biology and may give us clues of the origin of life.
And it is not just the origins of life here on Earth. NASA has sponsored research in Yellowstone because the hot environments found in the park might mimic environmental conditions on other planets. The thermophiles here could give us clues about the potential for life outside of Earth. Studying the origins of life is clearly important, but that wasn't the only thing scientists were interested in when studying thermophiles.
One of the greatest discoveries that has come from thermophiles in Yellowstone can be traced back to Dr. Thomas Brock was working in the park in the 1960s. He isolated a bacterium that we call Thermus aquaticus, and a couple of decades later, a scientist named Kary Mullis isolated an enzyme called Taq polymerase from the microbe. Using Taq polymerase, Kary Mullis then invented a process that we call polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, that is now used in laboratories across the world to amplify strands of DNA. PCR is used in things like crime scene investigation. It's also used extensively in biomedical research, looking for ways to cure cancer.
And that's not all. PCR is both part of screening for genetic diseases and the early detection of infectious diseases, such as HIV. It is also used to amplify DNA from the remains of our ancestors, helping shed light on the evolution of early humans. It is amazing that a tiny microbe discovered in Yellowstone has had a big impact on our everyday lives. That is why it is important to preserve these thermophiles, because they may contain future scientific discoveries.
Below the boardwalks are these vast microbial mats where all of the cells are living at this tiny microscopic level. So if you were to step onto the mat or put your hand in the water, you could impact these microbes.
There's not that many of these environments on the planet. They may contain interesting and rare life forms that we've never studied. If we don't protect these resources, they could be easily destroyed.
As you admire all the different thermophiles spread across Yellowstone, hopefully you have a greater appreciation for these tiny organisms and their ability to live in such extreme and inhospitable places. The iconic species of Yellowstone, like bears, wolves, and bison, are definitely worth seeing. But thermophiles might just be the real stars of the show. The sheer diversity of colors, textures, shapes, and patterns they bring to Yellowstone's thermal areas helps create an environment found nowhere else on Earth.